Dr. Narayan Swamy, and it is also my privilege that I have been invited by you to appear on your show, and I am quite updated about this Swami talks, and I saw that many famous people in India from diverse fields came and gave their talk on this show, and the topic is also very diverse. I mean, from business, IT, ICT, to language education, translation, literature, etc., even cinema. So I think it's a great contribution to your community. And since these videos are uploaded in your channel, so there is some sort of feeling of permanence here, so we can access during some other occasions, and we can watch them at our ease during our leisure time. Uh, so I really feel privileged to be able to connect to this show from Bangladesh. So I will directly go to the topic of my presentation, and let me share the screen. Yeah, can you see? I hope you can see, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So today I'm going to share some of my understanding and let's say my experience regarding evaluating ELT course books. Okay, so before that, we also need to understand that what we mean by ELT course books and what we mean by evaluate, and uh, in a very simple term, because this is going to be a condensed lecture or talk, so many technical terms will come. I really, it will not be possible for me to elaborately discuss all those terms, but later on you can find out if you're interested. So let's say by course book, we simply mean books that are used, that are written or produced for a particular course. Sometimes it is written officially and published from some external publishers. Sometimes it can be a compilation. So we call it a reader, okay, made by some teachers in collaboration with students, something like this. ELT is, all of you know, English language teaching. And then is evaluating, so which needs a little bit more, explanation, and I will come to this point a little later. In today's talk, so I am basically going to talk about these four uh, broader areas, but I will say I will spend most of the time on item number two. I mean, 12 significant issues while evaluating course books. And after that, we very quickly touch upon uh, number three and number four. So what I mean by the first slide, I mean the priority of context and gaps between the course and course books and their users. Okay. Now let's say when a course book is produced or a written, it is printed. The book becomes fixed and aesthetic. Even though a lot of research has gone into it, but immediately after it gets printed, it becomes aesthetic. And the needs analysis or the research into the learner's background, their needs, the requirements of the context, all these things are captured much before time. If, for example, if we want to introduce a course book in 2021, the research is supposed to begin at least 1 year before. So the data is at least 1 year old, and in some cases it can be as old as 5 years or more than that. And when we come with that slightly old data, we come to the classroom and we start teaching the textbook, then some new issues come up which we never anticipated, because our we collected data from one kind of learners, but now we are using the book with a different kind of learners. For example, if we really want to introduce a book in 2021, so let's assume that we have taken data from learners in 2019 or 2020. But you know that during 2019 and 20, the whole world was affected by Corona. Now it is gone, and when we go to the classroom in 2021, the, the Corona is gone. So the data from the pre-Corona time and while Corona time are going to be used with the post-Corona learners. So this kind of discrepancy, which is not intended, of course, but it can happen, is going to create a gap between the course book and the context. So the problem for the teachers and the learners, I mean, whoever is using that course book, is then how to fill up the gaps. And the materials writer, I mean, the writers of the course book are helpless because, most of the time there is a panel of 4 or 5 members who basically write the course books, but they do not necessarily teach that course books in all the classrooms. So it is now the role of chiefly the role of the teachers and then the learners to be able to fill up the gaps which I have just talked about. And one effective way of filling up that gap is, using supplementary materials. I mean, the areas which the offered course book is unable to address can be made up by using some relevant materials that the teachers will try to find out from their available resources. So to be able to do that, the teachers need to be, highly trained and knowledgeable about identifying the gaps between what the learners need and what the textbook or the course book is offering, and based on their realization or finding, they also need to be able to produce, or let's say select, suitable supplementary materials from the available resources. So what I mean to say is, I mean, teachers need to be knowledgeable about course book evaluation, and the topic that I'm discussing today is really very important for any teachers in any context, at any level, from primary till tertiary. So the significant issues, I mean, the 12 significant issues that I indicated in the initial slides are these, and I'm going to talk about each of them separately in the uh, given time. So I'm not going to actually read them out so you can look at, but I'm going to discuss it in little bit more detail in the next slide. So let's go to issue number 1, that is analysis versus evaluation. And uh, you know that analysis and evaluation are interchangeably used by by many of us. We think that analyzing course books are are the same, like the same as evaluating the course books, but they're actually not the same. Let's say if you look at these two columns, you will understand that when analysis is objective, evaluation is subjective. How? For example, when you are analyzing a course book, you actually try to find out what is there and what is not there. Okay. So maybe you have a curriculum or syllabus in your hand. By looking at the curriculum goals and objectives, you look at the textbook or course book, and then you find out that certain objective is not there, a certain goal has not been included in the book, certain other goals are there, something like that. So the analysis cannot actually tell you that what to do with this kind of knowledge or what else. It can also, it's a kind of tick and cross process. I mean, this is there and this is not there, something like that. But when you find that, okay, out of 100 items, 70 items are there and 30 items are not there, but what next? We do not know. So then probably we need to go to evaluation, which is slightly subjective. So now evaluation doesn't look at the what, it looks at how. For example, how those 30 items are not included in the course book, or why, or for example, the 70 items that are included, are they included properly? I mean, to what extent their representation has been made? So now we are going beyond what is there and what is not there. We are trying to investigate. So I mean, evaluation paves the way for further in-depth research into course book evaluation, which analysis doesn't do. It gives some primary idea about what is there and what is not there. So for a very simple reason, analysis then becomes impressionistic. You give roughly an overall idea about the course book that you are going to use, whereas evaluation gives you much more in-depth, inclusive, and more comprehensive view or idea about the course book. So, in sum, I can say that an analysis doesn't include evaluation at all, but evaluation includes analysis, because when you try to find out how something is happening or why something is happening, at first you need to begin from the what. So when you evaluate a course book, you basically automatically analyze that course book as well. But if you say that you only analyze a course book, it doesn't entail that you are going to evaluate. So that's the fundamental differences between these two. So in the second issue, we are going to talk about the agency in evaluation. I mean, then who will evaluate? Whose duty it is? And it depends. So for example, the authors themselves can evaluate the book, whether they have been able to implement what they thought, whether their ideas went in the right way. So, teacher analysts, I mean, teachers who work in the field of materials development can also work as materials evaluator. Sometimes teachers or the students or even the materials writers, according to Jolly and Bolaito, all of them can evaluate the course books. The students can also have that kind of freedom. So, okay, I will buy this certain book from this author or from that author, something like that. So they also apply some sort of evaluation criteria. So publishers can also evaluate their course books from their marketing perspectives. So if you look at the agency or the agents involved in evaluation, you will understand that all of them have their own interests and own perspectives from which they basically look at the course book. So the process of writing an effective and satisfying course book for all these stakeholders is really a, a, a tasking job for the writer, because it is very difficult to make all these parties happy. I also added researchers. Sometimes a researcher can also evaluate course books. For example, when I did my PhD, I had to evaluate the course books used in our secondary level. So I was neither the author nor the teacher or nor a student in that sense. So I evaluated like as a researcher. So the understanding is, when you are evaluating a course books, you can get a complete picture if you involve multiple perspectives from diverse kind of people. So not limited to only teachers or students, something like that. So the more diverse kind of stakeholders you involve, the better picture you get about the uh, agency in about the quality of course book. So a very simple question, that why should I evaluate course books? And once upon a time, the idea was like this, that course books or test books are like Bibles, so you cannot comment on them. Whatever is written there is completely incorrect. Okay. But now we have been more enlightened, and we know that, well, a textbook can be evaluated, And the reasons are like this. For example, we want to find out whether the book is effective. I mean, it really works for the purpose we wrote the book. We can also try to identify the gaps between the objectives and between what is really happening in the classroom. We also can evaluate the book to find out if or whether the book is liked by one particular group, like for example, it is liked by the students, but disliked by the teachers. Maybe it's more burden for them. It can be vice versa, or maybe the book is very good, but not liked by the publishers because it is expensive and people are not buying the book. This is also possible. Sometimes, a book is very good, but it is very cheap, and the materials are not standards. For example, in most of the cases, the government books are like this, which are often good in quality, but the paper quality of the book is not good at all, and people do not feel like buying those books because it doesn't attract the children. So that is also possible. We can also evaluate the course book when we see that there is a kind of gap or discrepancy between the immediate needs of the learners and the context and the needs assumed in the course books, which is not immediate because I told you that maybe the needs analysis one was done 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, but now we are using the book at this present context. And in the meantime, in these 2 3 years, the needs can change, which is not it will not be a drastic change, but there can be some sort of change. And in years like this, I mean 2020, Corona affected, there can be drastic changes observed in learner behaviors and their necessities. Sorry. Now, since we got some idea about the agency and the rationale, so the question is what to evaluate. I mean, when we are evaluating course books, so what will we evaluate? So there are many things to evaluate in English language course books. So, for example, Albright mentioned goals, content, method, and guidance. I mean, guidance is definitely teaching, okay, how a certain book is going to be taught. So the book can also include that kind of plan sometimes. Okay. In fact, presently, all these communicative books are, giving some ideas to the teachers about how to teach the book in the classroom. Albright also, not Albright, sorry, Dubin and Osteen talk about let's say evaluating uh, the combination of form and function. I mean language form, which is grammar, and function, or the product or process aspects assumed in a particular book, grammar or notion, themes or topic, communicative or socio-cultural functions. Whether all these aspects are present in a particular course book. McGrath talks about the micro approach and also the macro dimensions, including the evaluation of a particular task and the overall book in the light of the curriculum. Little talks about evaluation from a different perspective. For example, he gives us three broader questions. I mean, what is there in the book? What is required of the users, so learners or teachers? And what is implied? So this is something which leads to the concept of hidden curriculum. Okay. So I'm not going to any detail, but sometimes some message or messages or agenda are embedded in the textbook. So not directly, but they're implied. So Rani Rabdi talks about three types of validity. I mean the pedagogical validity in terms of the changing needs, which I mentioned earlier, that immediate contextual needs, and the psychological validity. So, I mean, how to learn, what should be the learning process, and then the process and content validity of a particular textbook. And John Shave, he talks about looking at the course books in the light of the syllabus and the teaching methods assumed in the curriculum, the learning situation, or also in the light of the learner profiles, which include their socio-economic background, and their necessity, etc. So we can say that when we are evaluating a course book, we can look at the linguistic elements like grammar, function, vocab, topic, and non-linguistic elements as well, like context and activities. I mean, what are learners supposed to do with their knowledge of language, and where are those learners situated? So now, depending on our knowledge of these, four issues, now we can talk about the types of evaluation. And even though there are many ways of, classifying evaluation, the most popular kinds are presented here. For example, pre-use evaluation, while use, and post-use. So Tomlinson, McGraw, all of them actually talked about them. So before offering the book to a particular class, you can evaluate them, which is pre-use. You can evaluate while teaching at the same time, simultaneously, that is while use. And you can also evaluate, based on or after using the textbook. So maybe you can collect data using reflective practices, and you can find out some information about the textbook. Okay. So what kind of evaluation we need basically depends on the purpose, types, evaluation, etc., etc. So here, my intended audience is actual classroom teachers. So I believe that they are already using some sort of materials in their classes. So I will say that while use evaluation is more suitable for them, but still, if sometimes they want to use a new handout, then it might require pre-use evaluation. Or sometimes, if after the class, if they look back what they did and what was the good thing and bad thing about their own classes, so that can become a post-use evaluation. So if we want to evaluate the course books or course materials that we are using, then what kind of tools, research tools we need? And basically there are different kinds of tools. And let's say the most standard one is checklist, which is often fixed, structured. Then we can also use informal discussions and grapevine methods to find out information about the course materials or course book. We can always ask our learners to take notes on their diaries or notebooks or workbooks and arrange for continual assessment. It can be formal or informal both. We can have focus group discussion with the stakeholders of textbook, including parents, publishers, students, teachers, everyone. There can be a narrative inquiry on selected samples, maybe the best student in the classroom and the weakest student in the classroom, and someone who is of average quality, something like this. Or maybe parents of these students, or my colleagues. I mean, what I think about my book and what another colleague thinks about this book. So we can always discuss and find out. There can be reflective practices, and there can also be ethnographic accounts. So as a teacher, I can also, write down my own reflections, and I can also try to find out how other people are reacting to the course materials. And what will be the kinds of questions that can be included in all these tools? And you see that uh, the variety or various kinds of questions or statements can be used here. So let's say in all rights checklist we see the presence of statements. So it's not a question, it's a kind of statement. For example, the textbook is learner friendly. So yes or no. Or for example, there is Likert scale 1 to 5. Okay, 1 being the weakest and 5 being the strongest, something like that. So Cunningsworth offered us two checklists, one in 1984 and another one 11 hours later in 1995. And Cunningsworth, in the first checklist, he combines, in fact, MCQs, I mean, multiple choice questions, yes no questions, which are very short, open ended questions using Likert scale, and later on, quick reference checklist. But later on in 1995, when he modified his own checklist, then he prioritized yes no questions and quick reference checklist. Okay. McGrath used both open and closed statements, and Rabdi used questions under the heading of general criteria or different criteria, something like that. Now, in the beginning, I told that I am going to share my understanding and experience. So, uh, as part of my PhD, I had to basically evaluate a set of course materials, and for that, when I was going through all these checklists available in the literature, I found that they are very effective, they are valid, uh, very comprehensive, but they were not completely suitable for evaluating the kind of materials which I intended to evaluate. And this is possible because everyone, all the checklists that we have mentioned so far, uh, were actually created keeping some particular sets of course books in their mind. And when you change these books, when you change the context, most of these checklists were created in the context of Europe or the USA. But when I was going to evaluate a book in Bangladesh, I found that this checklist gave me some very remarkable insight. But they were not enough. I mean, I cannot use them as they are to evaluate the course books that I want to uh, uh, evaluate. So I was left with two options. One is, adapt their checklists or create my own. But because I had a very unique kind of situation, which I will mention a little later, then I couldn't adapt any of the checklist I mentioned here. So I had to create my own checklist and I had to validate it. Okay, so it was more tasking and time consuming for me. It took a lot of time to go through the validation process, but at the end of the day, I was very happy because it gave me a very sound understanding of this field. I mean, this materials evaluation. So if you look at this thing, by the way, I used this checklist in my thesis, which was submitted in 2012, but it was not published. So later on, I extracted a paper from particularly from this part where I discussed how I developed my checklist. Okay, and I published it as a paper in 2017. So the reference is given at the end of this presentation. So when you look at this article, this is open access, then you can look at the actual checklist that I used. And when I was writing this paper, I also updated some of the reference lists that I used in 2012 because in 5 years many things changed. Okay. So in my checklist, I combined yes no questions, Likert scale, open-ended questions under different heading, and my evaluation followed uh, a kind of a trend. That is, it included some general characteristics of a book, then it narrowed down to the evaluation of a particular lesson, and then it further narrowed down to the evaluation of the tasks used in that lesson, okay, or in those lessons. And this entire process, I mean the selection of the lessons and the tasks were randomized. Only the book was fixed because it was offered by the government. And the book had two parts, I mean English part one and part two. The book is called, in fact, English for Today. It was part one and part two. And part one was written according to the communicative principle, which is suggested in curriculum. Part 2 is written according to the structural grammatical syllabus, which is not suggested in the curriculum and which was in direct contrast or contradiction to the curriculum suggestions. So the two books of the similar course book package were written in two different ways. And that's why I couldn't use any of the checklists that I mentioned. And I had to create my own checklist based on my reading, and I had to validate them. So if I go to the criteria, I mean, when you evaluate the course book, what are the things that you will be looking at? And there are thousands of things to look at when you are evaluating the course books. So one question is, are all these criteria of the same importance or not? And definitely the answer is no. So the importance of the criteria is defined by the necessity and the context and the purpose of evaluation. So for example, if the evaluation is done by the publisher, so for him, the most important criteria will be probably costing and then the quality of the papers or the prints. But if it is, let's say, evaluated by a researcher, then the most important criteria will be whether the book is effective or not, something like that. So, so Penny, I mean, she said that the criteria or its importance should be determined by the evaluators based on a consensus. So if there are more than one evaluator, maybe all of them can discuss and reach a consensus regarding which one is more important and which one is not. And then Fred Chambers also talk about the negative aspects. So when we evaluate a book, we mostly talk about the positive things, but what will happen to the negative things? So he said that we also include the negative factors, and based on them, we also try to evaluate the books that we have. And it has already been agreed by numerous academicians that there is basically no fixed set of criteria. So it always varies, and the importance always differs. Then what can we do? I mean, so what is the message for us? So perhaps as teachers, we have to be uh, informed, well informed about the existence of different um, checklists, and we also need to be aware about or aware of the factors that led to the increased or decreased importance of a certain criteria, and we need to be able to compare our own situation to the situations mentioned in the literature, and take suggestions or implications from our reading and understanding or the connection that we make between these two. So that's why I said that the teacher's informed understanding and contextual requirements can play a pivotal role in deciding on the importance of criteria. So when we decide the criteria and we evaluate the books because of X, Y, Z reasons or whatever, we come up with some sort of results. And now how to mention those results? That is another challenge. So if we really talk about our findings in a highly technical terms, then many people will not understand because each of us has a jargonized kind of linguistic repertoire to talk about things. So publishers talk about course books using their own registered specific language. So teachers have their own, parents have their own. So we must be able to communicate our finding from one party to another party so that everyone can understand. So when translating the findings of evaluation, particularly of textbooks, numerous ways have been found. So you see that rating, weighting, scoring, and comments. So let's say Penny talked about using tick, cross, or question. Tick is right, cross is not right, and question is what to do about it. McGrath used rating. I mean, first, second, third, this is rating. And then rating is weighted according to the importance, which need a little bit more discussion, but I think today I better skip that. And then the scoring, let's say I have 10 sets of uh, course books, and when I evaluate, I score them. So one set got 60, one set got 70, one set got 80, something like that, on a 4-point scale. So McGrath suggested 4-point Likert scale. So he actually discouraged using 5-point Likert scale, saying that people have a tendency to choose number three, which is neutral. So Rabdi also preferred using rating scale and comments. Okay, so we have also found the use of stars. I mean, 1 star or 4 stars, poor, excellent, just on a 4-point scale. For example, Leslie Sheldon used this thing. Tomlinson especially talked about adding comments at the end of each category with scores and averages. So, I mean, Tomlinson used both scores, and then scores were complemented by the comments. So integration of rating, weighting, scoring comments is important to quickly and accurately enable evaluators to reach a cumulative decision-making point if or when more evaluators are involved. So uh, the checklist that I used in my research basically used the suggestions that I just read aloud. And in my case, the evaluators were the actual practicing teachers and the researcher, which is uh, myself. So choice over content. So this is a point that need little bit of discussion, but I also gave some sort of idea. For example, in country like Bangladesh, as teachers, we hardly have any choice over content, especially in the mainstream secondary or higher secondary level, because the books are suggested by the government and we need to teach them. But if you look at the private schools or English medium schools or some other kinds of schools, then there is a choice. I mean, schools can choose a particular system of education or books published from a particular publisher. So that is possible. So uh, what I mean to say that, for example, I don't have any choice, but I have been asked to teach a particular course book. And when I start teaching, I found that there are some gaps between what I intend to teach, what my learners need, and what the book is offering. Then what do I do? Shall I go and challenge the authority or throw away the book? And that is not possible, a wise suggestion. If I know that how to evaluate, how to identify the gaps, then I'm also supposed to know how to fill up those gaps. So a good way out for tackling with such problem may be using supplementary materials instead of throwing away the entire book or replacing the book with another set not approved by the school. Maybe I can continue using that book, and I can also collect some relevant materials from other sources and teach those books along with the course book. But for doing this thing, we also need to have the knowledge of evaluating course books. That's why I wrote in another paper that the ability to evaluate a particular course book is empowering for teachers, not only for the language teachers, for teachers of any subjects. And I think all teachers must have some sort of knowledge to be able to understand which book is better and why, and whether this book is suitable for this class or not. So the next issue is subjectivity in evaluation. And in the very first slide, when I was discussing the difference between analysis and evaluation, I mentioned that analysis is objective, whereas evaluation is subjective. Then the question is what to do about this kind of subjectivity, because the subjectivity leads to prejudice and bias. So let's say evaluation is subjected because of teachers' own orientations, their philosophy of language and teaching and learning, and their beliefs and practices, etc. So how to control that thing? So even if the book is, for example, written systematically, scientifically, but you give it to a particular teacher, maybe an old school teacher, and who will throw away the book saying that no, it's not acceptable, it's not giving us the proper way of teaching. Okay, so how to go about these things? So Chambers, Sheldon, Tomlinson, all these experts actually suggest that the subjectivity cannot be completely removed from the process of evaluation, but it can be reduced to a considerable extent. And then how to do that? So they suggested that if the process of evaluation can be systematized, can be made more scientific, then probably we can reduce the elements of subjectivity from evaluation. Not only that, the people who will be involved in evaluation, particularly the teachers, they also need to be trained so that they can evaluate the book less subjectively. And the another ultimate way to reduce or avoid subjectivity is to involve more than one evaluator in decision making for cross checking the intuition based assumptions. That is the process which we call triangulation. Okay, so if we collect data from multiple sources, diverse kind of stakeholders, there is less possibility of bias being present in the findings. So I'm towards the end of my discussion, and here I'll be talking about the macro to micro aspects of the book. If you really want to evaluate the entire course book, it can be time consuming and it can be also expensive and sometimes unnecessary. For example, if you are given to evaluate 10 books, then it will take a year to let's say evaluate the entire book. So what can you do? I mean, what is the solution? To be easy on labor and time and also money. So let's say some tasks, instead of evaluating the entire book, may be chosen from some units randomly, and the findings and the feedback can be cross-checked against other randomly chosen tasks from some other units. Or the process that I did. I mean, if you remember, just some minutes ago I mentioned that in my checklist I evaluated some general features of the entire book. Then I evaluated randomly selected lessons and again randomly selected tasks from those units. So I reduced my burden of, let's say, evaluating the entire course book. So that can be another way out. And using different kinds of tools like and different kinds of questions like yes no questions, short answer questions, or let's say open-ended questions, they are also going to help you to process the data. If you include all the open-ended questions, it will be time consuming again to understand how to evaluate those books. Finally, you must have a valid, reliable, and customizable evaluation tools. So what I mean by that? So, for example, I mean the checklist that I used for evaluating my course books for my doctoral research, because I told you why it was not possible for me to use the readily available materials. For example, if I found that one particular checklist by Tomlinson is completely suitable for me, it would have reduced at least 6 months of work for me. I could have finished my degree 6 months earlier. But I didn't do that. So I took the difficult way. I had to take the difficult way. So I had to create my own checklist by looking at the context and my necessity and also looking at the nature of the book, which I told you that two parts of the book is written in two different ways. Then after I created the tool, the checklist, I had to go for pilot study. So I had to try with some similar kind of samples who will be participating in my actual research. So I used with some teachers, tried to find out whether I'm going in the right way or not. I had to go through the validating process. So I took opinions from the experts, and also went for a statistical validation using Cronbach alpha or some other methods. So when you are doing that, it is also a good way to create your own evaluation tools in a systematic manner so that the subjectivity or bias can be reduced and your findings can be trusted in a more reliable manner. But the tool must not be fixed. It has to be customizable because you know that after every year or maybe every 2 years, there will be some changes in the socio-economic, socio-cultural formation of the learners or the context where the school is located. Okay. So only the book will not change perhaps, but all other factors will change. And to be able to touch on those things, you have to have a flexible but systematically created evaluation tools using which you can evaluate consistently anticipated and unanticipated aspects of your course books. So I couldn't use, or maybe it is difficult for other teachers to use the readily available checklist because they don't meet the necessity of the context. Okay, they don't fulfill the requirements, and that's why we need to make our own checklist, but in a systematic manner, which I mentioned. We also we can also exchange the checklist with other institutes which are located in around our institutes. So it can be a collaborative work. We can take theirs also because the more the checklist is used, the more solid it becomes in terms of its usability and outcome. That's why I said that knowledge, unlike other things, increases while shared. So if teachers in a particular institute can properly evaluate the materials that they are using, the process will automatically train them to take classes in an effective manner. So that's why I claim or I mentioned that evaluation is a kind of self-training, and evaluation leads to training for better professional development. And if you are really good in this particular skill, it will automatically lead you to the development of other skills of teaching. So if the classroom teachers become a good materials evaluator, they are in a position to contribute to education in a very unique manner to their immediate locality, I mean, where they stay. That's why it is extremely important for the teachers to have adequate knowledge about materials evaluation, particularly ELT course books, because such course books include both the content aspects and language aspects, whereas other subjects mostly include the content aspects. The talk that today I presented to you is basically drawn from the papers I wrote in 2017, which is again extracted from my thesis. Uh, just just because we are now teaching online, for a particular situation, a COVID situation. So maybe it will be worthwhile if you also are interested to know about what to do if we are, teaching online, then what kind of materials to choose and how to choose. So in last October, I gave a talk on choosing materials for teaching online, and fortunately, that talk is also available on YouTube. I presented the talk for my colleagues at SSN College. So if you really want to know about how to choose materials while teaching online, maybe you can also spend some time listening to the video, the link of which is given here, or you directly go to English Department SSN, this channel, and find out the my presentation. There will be some overlaps between this presentation and that presentation because the fundamental aspects of materials or regarding selection of materials remain the same. We cannot do anything about that. But in that talk, I also talked about the online challenges and the ways out, okay, to deal with those challenges. So this is all from me. Uh, I would like to also hear from you in the form of comments or questions, which you can write to. You can send to me by writing emails, or also you can also write in the comment box of the channels. So thank you for my part.